women don't seem to, for the most part, respect a man who's not doing as well as them.
Right.
That's a giant issue. Even if the guy's doing okay. Like, say if your guy's making $50,000 a year, that's a very good living. He's out there doing well, but you make $300. You make $300,000 a year, and this fucking loser's over here with his $50,000. Like, you're kicking ass. You're like some bigwig at some big corporation. Like, that seems to be a real sticking point. And with men, especially if they have a household where they contribute income together, they pile all their income, and the man starts spending the woman's money on stuff. He starts buying stuff. He's got a new fishing rod. Where'd you get that, with your money or my money? It gets weird, right?
And incidentally, so speaking of, say, consumer psychology, stuff that I study, when you take a very rich woman and you go out on a date with her, even though she obviously can afford the dinner and she can afford anything that you're going to buy her, if you exhibit cues of frugality, cheapness, that's the perfect way to ensure that you won't have a second date. So it's not so much a question of, it's an old sexist ritual whereby men were wooing women. It really is an honest signal of your commitment to a woman. So the best way, and I get many of these letters where people ask me, "Hey, professor, what are dating advice?" Well, you do have to exhibit generosity when you go out with women. Nuptial gift giving. Nuptial gift giving is sort of the fancy term for courtship rituals across animal species. So many species, you have typically the male engaging in some form of courtship gift giving, and depending on the quality of the gift will determine whether the female will mate with you or not. Well, so much of what we do in marketing context is exactly that, right? It's the exact same phenomenon repeating itself in the human context, right? Engagement rings, right? The fact that you're supposed to spend a quarter of your yearly salary on this rock.
Is that really what it is?
Yeah. That's what I don't know if everybody meets it.
Oh, but that's right. It is that, right? It's 3 months.
Exactly.
God, when you say a quarter of the yearly salary, it makes you just go, what in the fuck is wrong with people?
But
that's so much money.
But here's the reason. Here's the reason. You ready? It's what's called a Zahavian signal. I don't know if I've ever discussed this in this podcast. Zahavian signal is basically the idea that for a signal to be honest, it has to be costly. Otherwise, everybody could imitate it, right? If all it takes for me to convince you of my honest intentions is to buy you flowers, and now let's go back behind the shed and have sex, well, then a lot of cheaters are going to convince you of doing this when they really didn't have good intentions. But if it takes for me to spend a quarter of my salary to convince you that I have honest, so therefore this is a form of what's called Zahavian signaling. And so I use this principle of Zahavian signaling to explain things like conspicuous consumption, right? The reason why you buy the fancy car that the other males can't hope to purchase, it's precisely because they can't afford to match your signal. Therefore, it's an honest signal. The reason why I buy $100 million painting that a monkey could have drawn shows how wealthy I am, that I could waste $100 million.
Ah, that makes sense. It's all just mating stuff.
It's mating and food.
Yeah.
You don't want to become somebody's dinner. You want to find dinner, and you want to have sex. Good night, everybody.
Yeah, those signals are so fascinating when we see them in our culture, and people get angry at them. Like, you see some guy pull up in a Ferrari and you go, look at this fucking loser with his little dick.
Right.
And you're like, maybe. Or maybe a guy with a shitload of money wants to let the world know because he likes to fuck. Right?
I've shared actually on this show, I think, the stories about one of my brothers who was a big car collector. 3 Ferraris, Aston Martin Lagunda. And I've even shared a story, which I'm happy to repeat, of we would go to nightclubs where this is the Olympian, this is the 5'3" guy, and we would go to nightclubs and he would pick the most beautiful woman and approach her, even though she's accompanied by a 6'4", tough looking guy. And he had that confidence, I think, because he had that wealth catapulting him. It
certainly helps.
It certainly helps.
Yeah. It's, It is a weird, ever prevalent aspect in the communication between men and females, is how much money does the man have?
Right.
I mean, and this is one thing that a lot of women hate because they don't want to feel like they could be purchased, and they can't. Some can.
Right.
A lot can. It's a factor. It's a big factor. And a lot of women are very just rabidly, ruthlessly independent. They don't want that ever in their life, and good for them. But the reality is, it's a very effective strategy. You pull up in that Ferrari or that Rolls Royce or whatever the fuck you're driving, and it has a big impact when you get to that nightclub.
And those studies have been done endlessly in evolutionary psychology. So here's one example. And you don't need to have a signal as big as a Ferrari. Just how you dress in terms of the status that is exhibited.
Yeah.
So there's a study that was done, I think, in the early 90s, where they manipulated the status, the sartorial, the attire of men and women into one of three different types, high status, medium, and, some T-shirt or McDonald's uniform, whatever. And then they asked men and women, one of six possible, would you go out for a coffee with this guy? Would you go out on dinner? Would you have sex with him? Would you marry him? And across all 6 levels of relationships, the status of the attire of a man had a profound effect on the likelihood of the woman saying yes. Higher the status, the more likely she said yes. That same manipulation on women had 0 effect on men.
Yeah.
In other words, no man has ever uttered the following words. My God, you've got a juicy butt, and I'd love to have sex with you, but you're not exhibiting cues of ambition. Therefore, no sex for you, Linda. Resources are good only to the extent that they allow you to ascend the social hierarchy, right?
Yes.
This doesn't explain why some women are attracted to the starving artist, right? Because why are so many women romanticizing over the guy with the guitar? Well, that's because they are choosing him based on his future trajectory, right? I am banking on the fact that you exhibit enough talent that I suspect that by investing in you, by choosing you, it's going to take me to that trajectory.
Yeah.
No woman has ever uttered the following words. You have no talent, you exhibit no ambition, you're never going to step out of the basement, let's have sex, right?
You're not gonna get it for free. Come on, spend that dirty, sexy money on me. If you want to put it on me, you're not gonna get it for free. Come on, spend that dirty,